when we open up science, we open up the future of science. We are working towards an agreement that open access is the way forward. It's going to develop science at a faster pace, and it's going to benefit everyone, really. Most importantly, for our society partners, to ensure that open access is not just a success, but also financially, it needs to be sustainable. I think one of the myths around open access is that the quality is somehow reduced with open access, and it's really not. It's a complete myth, to be honest.
Just the process of finding the right article, being allowed to access it, let alone download it, it was quite frustrating, to be honest.
My concerns with the traditional subscription model is just that it holds back science. So I think the value of the publisher, it needs to be visible, it needs to be demonstrated. I think publishers have a little bit more work to do to show that value.
Absolutely.
Insights Exchange. Conversations shaping academic research. Nikesh Gosalia speaks with Robyn Mugridge on paywalls, open access, and the future of academic publishing.
Hello, everyone. Today's guest is the head of publishing partnerships at Frontiers in London. She's a member of the ALPSP Education Committee and a huge proponent for the open access. If you've checked out her blog, you know she's an active voice in the publishing industry and provides tons of great advice for people looking for careers in this space. We are very excited to have her on today's episode. Everyone, please welcome Robyn Mugridge. Welcome, Robyn.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Before we go into any specifics, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
I was born in Portsmouth and I live in Hampshire. Although I, work in London as well, traveling back and forward, but I'm based in Hampshire, still a Hampshire girl. I studied history with English literature. I did a BA, and then I left uni and I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. I took a job as an English lecturer at a local college and quickly discovered that teaching was not for me. A huge props to anyone who teaches because it's a hugely challenging job, but not for me. But I did have a relative who worked in trade publishing who recommended that I have a look. And I thought, you know what, as interesting as trade publishing is, it's just not really for me. It's not quite right for me, I felt. But I had some experience working in the NHS. So I thought, you know what, I'm kind of interested in medical publishing and kind of science. I'm going to go into that field. And I got my first job in publishing at the NIHR Journals Library, which is based in Southampton. And I was an assistant publishing manager. And I was there for a couple of years, and it really set things in motion for me. It set the tone for open access and all future things. And then I went on to work for Springer Nature in London, and then on to Frontiers, which I've been at Frontiers for about 5 years now in various roles.
You did mention that you are currently working with Frontiers. So you currently serve as the head of publishing partnerships. So can you tell us a little bit about what exactly do you do in that role? What is Frontiers all about?
Yeah, well, Frontiers is a gold open access publisher. We only publish gold open access journals. And, the company's really seen huge growth. If you look at any of the publication rates, huge quality growth as well in the last sort of 10 years, really. And so 5 years ago, I joined Frontiers and I was working in the journals program, and we decided to do some work with societies. And so I established our publishing partnerships program for societies back in 2019, and we sort of officially launched in 2020 with 3 partners. We've now signed our 14th partner. So really, it's grown at a great rate over the last few years. And the majority of the journals that we work with they're all society journals, and most of them have flipped from subscription, full subscription models or hybrid subscription models to fully gold open access. So it's been a huge change for them. And my role really is to oversee that process of flipping the journals, to run those journals, to make sure that they're successful, but perhaps most importantly for our society partners, to ensure that open access is not just a success in terms of the journal and the publications, but also financially it needs to be sustainable for our partners. So that is part of my role, finding a path for the society where they can transition their journal in a financially sustainable way.
Congratulations on the 14th partnership that you just mentioned. If you're allowed to talk a little bit more about these society partnerships and how they look, could you just elaborate a little bit on how does Frontiers support these societies in terms of their publishing programs, etc.? And the reason I mention this is that I know that it's been a couple of years that Plan S came in. I think there was a lot of conversation around that point of time, perhaps a little bit of panic as well in terms of an extreme situation. Yeah, what will happen to societies? Will they cease to exist? We all know the importance of societies and the super specialization that they bring in. Just to kind of maybe talk a little bit more about that in terms of how is Frontier supporting? And of course, if you have any thoughts around how are societies doing now, are they thriving?
Frontiers works on an APC model. So, and we're very transparent about the way we work with our societies. I think that's one of the real pluses about Frontiers. We're very upfront about things. So it's very clear, when societies come to us, exactly what the model is, how we work, and how it's going to work for them. So our model is APCs, article processing charges, and we essentially split that revenue with the society with varying rates, depending on what the society negotiate. But, we split that revenue. So it's a revenue share agreement. But we offer our institutional partnerships to societies. So this is where the society can benefit because the institution has agreed to pay the article processing fees for their authors. So we do find that a large proportion of our articles that are published in our society journals are actually covered by these institutional partnerships, which means that the revenue is a little bit more predictable. The society can say, okay, so even though it's based on volume of papers published, I can relax a little bit because I know that a percentage of the papers are going to be covered by institutions. And it's not quite as much of a risk. I think the risk is in the unknown with open access. And when you can take away that unknown, for societies, it's a lot easier to predict what's going to happen when their journal actually moves to open access. And so, we provide access to those institutional partnerships, but also the actual publishing process. I think one of the myths around open access is that the quality is somehow reduced with open access. And it's really not. Actually, we find that there are excellent citation rates within journals with open access options and fully open access. And they're very comparable and sometimes exceed subscription. It's a complete myth, to be honest, about open access. So one of the things that we do is ensure that the quality is there throughout the publishing process, throughout the peer review, so that they can be assured by the end of the process they're publishing a very high quality journal as well as a sustainable financial option for the society.
You run a blog, and which is fantastic, by the way. And anybody listening in, you should subscribe to Robyn's blog. But you talk about your experience working in the journal publishing industry. So could you talk a little bit about, first, of course, what was the motivation around doing that? I know from experience, you need that inherent motivation to say that I want to give back something to the industry. I want people to kind of read about this, and then to actually, get that time, make it happen, considering, how busy you are.
I started the blog because I was getting questions from my team. So I have quite a large team now, and, onboarding new people who are brand new to the industry. I was getting lots of different questions, and it kind of reminded me of when I started in the industry. And the only real blog I found was, I'm not sure if I can say the name, probably can, but one of the main blogs in the industry that's very prevalent. But it was very in depth. It was really, really detailed. And then it would say something about the industry, about a new development. And then I'd go, you know what, I don't know what that is now. And I need to go and research that because I don't know what that is. You know, it was aimed at an audience that was much more experienced in the publishing industry. And there wasn't really anything out there for people who were newly coming into the industry, had questions about how things worked, what new developments were, and just generally didn't have anywhere to go. So I thought, right, I'm going to create a blog, all with the best intentions to write loads of articles, loads of blog posts. And, you know, I did. It is hard to keep it up. I will say that. You know, I'm still going. I just published a recent one on copyright because I found that I was getting lots of questions about copyright rules and what's going on there. But it is hard, but it's nice. I do get lots of really positive feedback about people who have shared it with their teams to, you know, newcomers in their team, and encourage them to subscribe. And I get ideas from readers who say to me, oh, could we maybe have a blog post on this, please? It would be really helpful. I've even had a couple of people who have been in the industry a few years say to me that it's quite a fresh perspective. You know, I'm not serious on the blog. I'm pretty open. I'm pretty frank about what I think about things. I'm not going to pussyfoot around things. So, you know, I like to be a little bit humorous on there and take it a different perspective, a little bit of a lighter perspective. You know, we work in publishing. No one's going to die from what we do. It's publishing. So we can afford to be a little bit lighter, I think, with what we say and what we think.
Do you do your own research at times when, you know, you probably are not as familiar with a particular topic and then, you know, come up with what you write, or is it that you know, kind of handpick a certain theme?
Yeah, I try to pick themes that I'm knowledgeable about because otherwise, you know, I don't want to be giving information and portraying myself as an expert in an area where I'm not so knowledgeable. But, you know, there have been times, you know, the latest blog post I did around copyright, it's all kind of basic stuff around copyright that I wanted to give to people, and information I wanted to convey in a slightly new and interesting way. But I learned a few things myself when I was doing that around the in-depth details about CC BY and CC BY non-commercial and all of these different things that, you know, when you don't do it daily and that's not your specialty every day, you do have to do some research and find out a little bit more. And that all takes time. So, you know, it is an investment. And I would encourage anyone who's in publishing, especially people who are new to publishing. I'd love to see a blog from an early career publisher starting out their career and their troubles and tribulations throughout that process. I would encourage anyone to give it a go. It is great fun, and it's nice to see all the people reading it as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure I can say this on behalf of, you know, a large part of the industry, Robyn, that, you know, we really appreciate the fact that you've taken up this initiative, because I had a similar problem. When I would read a lot of blogs, a lot of people who are very experienced would write from the lens of assuming that you know the basics and then building on it. And whereas I would kind of, you know, find myself a lot of times, you know, trying to connect the dots in terms of, okay, hold on, I need to, I think, know step one before, you know, kind of understanding this particular written article. And I think that's where the way you've written and the fact that you've made it really light, easy to understand, not put a lot of pressure on yourself in terms of, you know, I need to get everything right and technical. I think that's absolutely perfect, because I think that was the missing gap. Thank you for all the efforts, and keep going with that.
Yeah, it's the same for you. Thank you for doing your podcast. I do listen. I regularly listen in, and it's always great to hear about different people in different sectors of the industry and find out what they do. I think it's, you know, for me, it's been really enlightening. So
we all know that there are a few concerns and issues with the traditional subscription model in the industry. But just for the benefit of the listeners, what do you think are, you know, maybe top 2 or 3 issues with the model? And do you think, you know, that will cease to exist, or will there be some sort of a, you know, hybrid structure in future? So just any thoughts on that?
I think most people know that there are some concerns around the subscription model. The content is published behind a paywall. You know, when we publish things and we put them behind a paywall, there is the issue of access there. It means that researchers who can't afford that subscription, and believe me, they are expensive individual subscription plans, or their institution doesn't have access to that journal through an institutional subscription, that researcher can't look at that paper. Imagine if we find the keys to solving climate change, or curing cancer, and we have that in a paper, but it's hidden behind a paywall, and the researcher who needs to use that paper to really progress that field of research cannot access it, then we're holding back research, we're slowing down research. When we open that research up, it has positive ripple effects everywhere. Scientists can build on the work of others no matter where they are in the globe. The globe is not limited to Europe and North America. There are researchers producing excellent work throughout the world. And to progress their work, they need to have access to the foundations that have gone before. So I think, my concerns with the traditional subscription model is just that it holds back science. And when we open up science, we open up the future of science. I
also have spent some amount of time in the industry, and I knew about some of these issues, but more recently, I've enrolled myself for a course in Warwick, and I went through this kind of painful journey myself, where I wanted to access so many research articles. Fortunately, the university did have licenses and partnerships with a lot of publishers, but just the process of finding the right article, being allowed to access it, let alone download it, and then maybe kind of share it more freely, it was quite frustrating, to be honest. And you want access to as many topics, you want to kind of gather all of that knowledge and then maybe come up with. So I know what you mean, and I'm glad that we are kind of moving towards open access. And so talking a little bit about open access, through your blogs, through your panel discussions and presentations, I know that you're a huge proponent for open access. But maybe, why do you believe open access is the right way to be? Or is that an interim step towards maybe something larger? Or do you think, that open access hopefully will solve these issues for us?
I think open access is itself in the middle of development at the moment. There are open access models that are working really, really well and really smoothly, but there are always criticisms of open access as well, and we need to smooth those out. But I think we are working towards an agreement that open access is the way forward. I think most publishers, most researchers would say that is the optimal model, but it's how they get there where they face some challenges. So I think, if we're working collectively towards open access, then we will innovate and develop solutions that mean that everyone can afford article processing charges, for example, which can be a barrier in itself to open access publishing. There are lots of new innovations that are coming out now to provide access for publishing. I've mentioned institutional agreements, there are transformative agreements, there's lots of different things coming out. Diamond open access publishing, I think it's around 73% of the DOAJ indexed journals are actually Diamond open access, so no fees whatsoever, which is fantastic to see a growth in Diamond open access. So I think open access, we all can say that is the way forward. It's going to develop science at a faster pace, and it's going to benefit everyone really because of that. Are we fully there yet? Do we have all the kinks sorted out? No, we don't, but we are getting there, which is the most important thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And in terms of just staying on with the model of open access and APCs, how do you feel about researchers having to pay to publish in an open access journal? And do you think that this could be a hindrance for researchers from underdeveloped countries or organizations, institutes who probably cannot afford?
Yeah, I speak to researchers all the time who have concerns about paying for an article processing charge. And it's completely valid, especially when you look at some of the APCs where there are journals with subscription and hybrid. There's APCs of thousands and thousands of pounds, 5,000 up to £10,000. And you just look at those numbers and think, wow, that's crazy fees. So it's completely valid that they would have concerns. I think most fully open access journals have a sort of benchmark around kind of $2,000 to $3,000, and that's kind of the market price. But even that, for researchers in institutions where they have no funding support and can't afford to pay this out of their pocket, shouldn't really have to pay out of their pocket, to be honest. That's just not feasible for them. So I think this is where it falls on the publishers to provide some support here. Commercial publishers are for-profit organizations. They have the ability to support researchers, either through models that they've developed, so institutional agreements, although it's not always possible to develop these institutional agreements with institutions in countries outside of Europe, North America, and Oceania, for example. It is falling on the publisher. So commercial publishers, like Frontiers, where I work, they have waiver programs where authors can submit a request. And usually these are generous programs. They take into account where the author's from, whether the author has any funding or no funding, and they provide the support. So for me, I think, yes, it is a worry for me as a publisher that there are people in different countries who cannot afford to pay the fees. And so I believe that it's our responsibility as publishers to enable access and provide that support. Whether it's a longer term solution, I don't know. I think it's an intermediary step, and that there's changes needed in the infrastructure, in funding and publishing more broadly to actually facilitate a change in the longer term.
Just staying on with that particular topic, there's also an argument saying that, without going into the specifics of a number for the APC charges, that publishers are charging that APC because obviously you need to cover a lot of the costs, and they are cost-intensive processes, peer review and so many others, and so in light of that, my question is that how do you think publishers in general, or your experience within Frontiers, are maybe people thinking around, what could be the other revenue sources? So is there conversation around maybe looking at value-added services, which the authors can benefit from? Because I guess from what I understand when I read, funders' websites, I think they do mention saying that in case if there are value-added services which are useful, help, further dissemination and access to science, they would be willing to pay for them as well. So I'm just kind of trying to also bring in or get your thoughts on the other perspective, that it's not completely wrong. I mean, publishers also do have and carry so many costs. So how do you kind of, think of creative, innovative ways to look at, revenue generation as well?
It's actually something that I've been looking into more and more recently. Working with societies, we need to show that we are providing an excellent level of service for our societies. And so, and it's not just for the societies, but for the authors themselves. So I think publishers are increasingly looking to show value for money. And so if publishers can work to provide additional author services, either through providing that themselves or working with other companies, they are showing that APC, that value is there for that number. But also, authors are very willing to, we know authors are willing to pay a little bit more for these extra services because it increases the quality of their paper. If you look at editing, for example, or proofreading, the statistics say that they're more likely to be accepted if they have a really nice, coherent, detailed paper, but that's very clear and the English language level is very strong. They're more likely to be accepted in the journal and also have their research read, downloaded much more frequently. So I think the value of the publisher it needs to be visible. It needs to be demonstrated. I think publishers have a little bit more work to do to show that value, because we are still receiving criticism that, why are we paying this amount? The publisher provides a lot of services that perhaps go unseen that we need to highlight.
In summary, the OSTP requires results of taxpayer funder research to be released openly. I think we've got a deadline of 2025, 2026. In your opinion, how do you think that will affect, science's role in general on society?
I'm excited. I want to know what's going to happen as much as anyone else. I'm excited to start having conversations with researchers from the US, where it's less about, paying APC, that kind of thing. And it's more about their actual work, and seeing that published and seeing that open for everyone. I'm really excited for that. We do have a few years to get there, though. I think it's going to have a big impact. I think we need a little bit more definition around the mandate. That the OSTP, with all good intentions, kind of plonked this on our desk, and we want to implement it, but we need a bit more guidance as to how it's going to be implemented, how it's going to be funded. I think that we're going to see a ripple effect. We are going to see not just tax-funded research being published open access. I think it's going to change the mindset in researchers and institutions in the US. I think they are now going to see that the future will be publishing open access in whatever model of open access might be, but they're going to see that it is open access for the future. So we should make the change and start making the change now. So I do think, by 2025, whether we'll see the entire publishing industry in the US move to open access, probably not. But what we will see is a shift in mindset towards open access. And I think in the longer term, maybe in another 5 years down the line, we'll see maybe a huge, I think the majority of the publishing industry in the US will then be open access because of this mandate.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to kind of build on that, Robyn, we all know, of course, US is one of the top 3 in terms of research output. We know that a lot of other countries, especially developed countries, are also moving more and more towards open access. So clearly that should help in terms of the overall transition, like you said, or a mindset shift. But to talk about some of the other potentially, growing countries in terms of research output, so, namely China, some of the Asian markets, perhaps India in future, do you think that there will be a ripple effect at some point of time, in those countries as well, where perhaps the policymakers will say, I think we need to look at this very closely? Or do you think, there's some more time to go?
I think China is already pretty much there in terms of open access. We do see huge numbers of publications across all publishers from China, and they are a powerhouse when it comes to research. So I think that they're pretty much there. I think there are some issues around what journals you can publish in from China. I'm not an expert in this, but as I understand, they can only publish in Chinese researchers can only publish in journals of a certain impact factor, for example, which maybe isn't the best way to go forward. But in terms of, other countries, India, for example, I know they're already having discussions about open access and mandating open access. I think that we are now in a period where we're going to see a succession of mandates coming from governments that taxpayer research, and I think the emphasis there is on taxpayer because the person paying for that research is the public. They want to be able to access the results of that research. There is a demand there, so that they can themselves benefit personally. Patients want to be able to read the research about their conditions, and they can't currently, not always. So I do think that there will be a succession of mandates, like I say, throughout different countries. How that will look, I really don't know at this stage. But I think there will be like you say, a further impact on other countries, as not just US and Europe.
Just to kind of wrap up the conversation around OSTP, I know that you did mention, Robyn, about there's still lack of clarity on some of the aspects. Obviously, it's a huge change. The detailing needs to be done. But are there any potential drawbacks to the new OSTP policies from a point of view of the vision of increased open access or just science being available to everyone?
As I said, the way the policy has been announced and how it's going to be implemented, it has been poorly defined. I think that the one thing I would say is that large commercial publishers are well set up to accommodate for this change. Where I have some concerns working with societies is that smaller publishers, independent publishers and societies may get a bit lost in this. Where this is going to benefit is these big deals. So looking at big transformative deals, commercial publisher deals, and commercial institutional partnerships, like Frontiers as well. We are a commercial publisher. We will naturally be well set up for this change to facilitate open access publications for US taxpayer funded research. Will independent publishers be able to compete with this and offer these pathways to publishing? I don't know. So I think that there is perhaps a drawback there or a threat to independent or smaller publishers who are already struggling, I think, sometimes in competition with the bigger publishers.
Now that you've started working more closely with societies in terms of securing partnerships and helping them manage this transition, what do you think, Robyn, prevents most societies from, say, adopting open access?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things that really prevent societies. And one is more transient and the other is more tangible. And perhaps the more tangible one is the finances. We talked a lot about the finances. Unfortunately, it's hard to get away from sometimes because societies, essentially, a lot of societies, all of their revenue comes from journals, or at least a large proportion of their revenue comes from journals. And a lot of societies are non-profit. And so they must keep their activities within their society going, and they need to be able to fund that activity. And the margins are very, very slim. So a lot of societies are on currently subscription model journals where they have a very predictable level of revenue coming in, and they can see that that's going to increase and has increased over several years. Usually these subscription revenues are somewhat inflated, shall we say, because it's in the publisher interest to keep those journals subscription. They're revenue generating journals. And so when looking to change a business model of a journal, there's always a risk. With any big change, there is a risk there that they might not be able to continue with the same level of finances that they were receiving before. And that they might not be able to attract as many authors to publish and pay to publish in the journal. There's always that risk. That risk can be mitigated through a proper financial plan, really forecasting carefully, having institutional partnerships, and doing a lot of good marketing and communication around the transition of the journal. And usually, that, at least in my personal experience, has translated into a successful transition. The other main thing that is stopping societies from transitioning is, again, a bit of a mindset issue in that they have published subscription for many, many years. They know subscription, they know how to make it work, and the journal is consistently producing revenue for them. So for them, it is quite a challenge. But what I would say to that point is that societies are receiving demands from their membership to transition their journals. Society members want open access, they're demanding open access, and they need open access to attract and keep those members for paying their membership fee to the society. So They want to keep members. They need to transition to open access. And they're starting to change that view that subscription is just the only way for them. And I think it's publishers like Frontiers and other open access publishers who are showing that there are sustainable routes for them financially as well.
Could you talk a little bit about what these transformative agreements are, how they've evolved perhaps in the last, couple of years, and why are they considered as such a huge accomplishment for the industry?
Well, that's an interesting choice of word, accomplishment. I'll come back to that in a moment. I appreciate the opportunity just to define what transformative agreements are, because, I'm all about, breaking down some of these topics that are a bit confusing, especially for people new to the industry. So transformative agreements, in essence, although they are quite difficult to define, are agreements that they're contracts between a publisher and an institution or consortia that essentially commit to the gradual change of a business model from subscription/subscription hybrid to fully open access over a time period of usually about 5 to 10 years generally. I would say that the transition is towards open access and not to open access, because I think a lot, and I think it's already been proven that a lot of the transformative journals are not meeting their targets for open access already. The Plan S did an evaluation of the transformative journals in their first year, and only 56% of those transformative journals actually achieved their first year open access targets. So we're already seeing that they're not doing the job in the name, which is transformation. My concern about transformative agreements is that they're not going to actually achieve transformation, and that they are going to just slowly push the final transformation further and further away. And, we'll get to 5 years or 10 years and it won't have been achieved. So we just keep on going, I don't want to see open access slowed. I would like to see open access continue at a fast pace. However, I would say that there are some areas where transformation at a fast pace maybe isn't possible. Certain fields, humanities, for example, just doesn't have the infrastructure and the funding to transition at quite such a fast pace as, for example, medicine. So, I would say, coming back to the word accomplishment, are they an accomplishment? I think that they have, if done well, transformative agreements can accomplish a lot in transitioning journals. Unfortunately, I don't think it's in the best interest for a lot of publishers to transition to open access. They may be losing revenue, and that might be why they're interested in slowing that transition. A lot of journals could flip much, much more quickly than they are, but they've been caught in these big transformative deals, and they can't get out of them. And so they're forced to transition slowly. So I think that there is certainly a place for them within certain journals there, but it's a challenge. Do they truly transform, or do they slow open access? I'm not sure just yet. I'm not convinced.
Okay, got it. So I've been talking to a few, publishing heads in a few societies, in a kind of medium-sized publishers, who are saying that, we've committed to 100% open access by, say, year 2025. But at the same time, maybe they will not, charge APC. And so in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, if you've committed to 100% open access, subscription deals are not going to exist. You're not going to charge APC. Then is it too much of reliance on transformative agreements? Or are there other creative ways in which, publishers, societies can look to, again, generate revenue?
Yeah, I mean, because they don't have an APC because the institution is paying for the fees for those authors. But those, these big deals will get to a point where, is it going? What happens at the end of this transformation? institutions are paying for to publish and to read the content, surely the read part should be part and parcel of the deal. You know, if you publish something, you want to be able to read it. So why do you have to pay twice, both for publishing and for reading? And I think that's the issue at the moment that we're coming into. What's going to happen at the end of this? You know, where they have to pay to publish, do they still have to pay to read when everything is open access? And how is that financial model going to stand up? It's very difficult to know. And one of the biggest challenges with transformative agreements is that a lot of the information is highly confidential. It's not very transparent how these models work. So if you're on the outside, you really don't know what's going on within these agreements. So I think at the end of the 5 years, once let's say they do flip all of the journal to open access, how does that continue? And I think having some sort of APC is actually a good thing, because we're looking at a different model of working. You know, it's very hard to say. I think it's good to have a diversification in the models.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to move on to the so-called future of the publishing world. And I know that you'd organized an ALP-SP webinar on the use of video in publishing.
I did.
That just got me thinking, because, you know, within my organization and even in my own personal capacity, that's a space that we are very excited about. What do you envision the future of academic publishing to look like? I mean, obviously there are different views. Can some of these alternate formats coexist along with a journal article? Can it be another extreme where it just completely replaces journal articles, and you just have some of these alternate formats as consumption pattern in general for a lot of the audience's changes? Everyone wants everything to be bite-sized, everything to be on the go. Just your thoughts, Robyn, in terms of how do you think this might evolve? And then, of course, a second part to that question is, what other forms of technology or media do you imagine being prevalent in the future?
I think short form content versus long form content has a slight issue around trust in science. And I think trust in science has taken a bit of a hit, unfortunately, with COVID and lots of different theories coming about COVID and things like that. I think trust in science has taken a little bit of a hit. So where I used to believe, and I still do, I believe that short form content is really going to take over soon, maybe not fully, because the reason why we trust in science is because it's been thoroughly validated through a process of peer review. And so we'll always need to have some sort of detailed, long form of the research and an understanding of the breakdown of how scientists or researchers have achieved certain results. But where I do see, and I think this is quite fun, I think we'll see some sort of, TikTok for science, where I think, this has been mentioned by other people before, but I think we'll get to that point where we have a quick breakdown, kind of a lay summary in video form of the research, where it's digestible, we can have headline results, it's hard hitting, it's impactful, and it makes researchers who are reading that research, who might want to use that, go, okay, I want to find out more. It might also make the public want to find out more and be more interested in science. I think one of the huge challenges we have is that scientific research is so far away from the lay public that they're just not really interested, and that's where they end up clicking on Daily Mail articles. We don't want that. We want them to really understand the research. So I do think that there will be more of a shift to video content. I don't think we'll fully leave behind the PDF, but I think the PDF will be enriched. We'll have kind of code and lots of accessible data through the PDF. I also think we'll see more collaboration. I think we'll have scientists, commenting more on articles, both post and pre-publication. And I think that will become more of a standard part of that process of publishing an article.
Absolutely, yeah. There's also been a lot of conversation in the last 3 to 4 years around use of AI, perhaps maybe exploring blockchain as well. In my personal experience, what I've seen over the last year is that there's definitely more acceptance around the role of AI in what we can do. Maybe 3 to 4 years back, it was vague. It was perceived to be, will it replace humans? Will it take away all the jobs? But I think now people are kind of realizing that there is definitely a benefit to it, where a lot of the repetitive tasks, manual tasks can be automated, perhaps. So just your quick thoughts on the role of AI or any other technology in the publishing world.
I can't quite believe I missed out AI. I feel like for me, it's become such an accepted part of publishing that I don't even see it as something really special in the future, because we're already pretty much getting there. Frontiers has an AI publishing solution called Ira, and a lot of publishers are now turning to AI that they've either developed in-house or working externally with companies, because it allows for more precision when we look at manuscripts and evaluation of the quality. It's able to pick up things like image manipulation and paper mills and ethical issues that we, when we look at an article, would take us hours to look at and find. So I think it will not replace the human decision-making element, but I do think it will support editors, reviewers, and authors in assessing and improving upon the quality of the paper. I think editors do not need to fear for their jobs. It's never going to take over, because we want humans to be involved. We don't want machines making full decisions about science. You never know where that might go. I've got dystopian visions of films in mind right now, but it will support them and hopefully in a positive way to help them achieve their jobs and maybe make the process a bit more efficient at the same time. Absolutely.
No, I agree with you, Robyn. And just kind of going back to your previous comment around the use of video and other alternate formats, that just prompted a question in my mind. And I know that Frontiers has a very interesting initiative called Frontiers for Young Minds. I think it's probably one of the most kind of unique programs that is being run successfully. I've spoken to a few folks within Frontiers around that as well. But I'm wondering, just for the benefit of listeners again, Robyn, do you want to kind of just briefly talk about what that is about? Because it's really fascinating.
Oh, well, I absolutely love the Frontiers for Young Minds program. It's really good fun. I don't personally run it. My colleague Laura Henderson, shout out to her, does run the program. And it aims to it forces scientists to put their scientific revelations into a much clearer format, because the papers are reviewed by kids and they can be pretty harsh critics when it comes to the content. And then it's reviewed by kids, and then it's published, and you can see who like the ages of the kids who reviewed it. And we do some nice illustrations with it. So the goal is to make science more accessible to younger people, to kids and teenagers, because, increasingly we are seeing that teenagers are not so interested in science, and we want to help them to be more interested in science, more interested in different areas of science as well. So it shines a spotlight on lots and lots of different areas. We've recently had a selection of Nobel Prize winners who are committing to doing articles for Frontiers for Young Minds. There was a nice piece about it in the Washington Post that came out the other day, which I encourage anyone listening to have a look at. So there's exciting things coming in this sphere, and I think it's something that all publishers should be doing, reaching out and engaging with younger people in and about science.
Absolutely. No, I think it's truly amazing. And I've spoken to a few folks over the years, and the way it's grown, evolved, it's just fabulous. Just when you spoke a little bit about collaboration, I know that you spoke about maybe the kind of the other side of the industry that we work. So, a little bit around collaboration within researchers, scientists, and that has been happening. That will probably keep growing. What do you think about collaboration as far as, the publishers and societies are concerned, maybe along with other third-party vendors, funders? How do you see that now? How do you think that'll evolve in the next 5 to 10 years? What's missing, perhaps? What do we need to do as an industry as a whole to really kind of, collaborate even more?
I think the industry is going to become much more fluid. I think right now we're very siloed as an industry. We have the funder, the institution, the researcher, the publisher, and then we have, post-publication sort of outlets. And I sort of lump them all together, which isn't fair, but it's the only way I can do it right now in my head. It's very siloed. And I think as things progress, maybe not in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe it'll be a bit longer than that, but we'll move to a much more fluid version of publishing. I think preprints have already started this process. I think preprints have started to say, peer review doesn't need to be here. We can do pre-publication peer review, or we can see the science before it's published, and authors can start to get some collaboration, some feedback on that. And then we'll see more post-publication peer review as well. I think it's going to become much, much more fluid, and we'll see dissemination as part of the process prior to publication as well as post-publication. So I think all of these elements, more visibility and more dissemination, will help with the collaboration. I think societies are still, again, a little siloed, and especially independent societies are working hard on their own. There is, I think, a way to support all societies, whether they want to stay independent or work with a commercial publisher, without having to sign up to say, I'm signing up with a commercial publisher. I think that there are other ways to collaborate, and we're starting to explore some of that at Frontiers for those societies who want to maintain their independence, but also want to have some of the benefits that a commercial publisher can offer. So I think that, collaboration will increase. I'm excited to see that happening. I want to see this more fluid, more innovative version of publishing that's less siloed. And I'd like to see also, and this is maybe a little bit out there, but I'd like to see publishers collaborating more effectively with each other, with funders. I think if we work together, and maybe it's a little idealistic, but if we do, we can collaborate and find some more accessible routes for open access publishing.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you, Robyn. And I think we've seen some indications towards it. I think there was some announcement around a solution for paper mills and a few publishers getting together a few years back, maybe, around Get FTR. And so I agree with you, Robyn. I think we can get more collaborative, look at some of the problems as common problems, not individual problems. I agree with you. I see the industry kind of, moving and becoming more fluid in future as well. Fingers crossed. Indeed. So before we close up, your blog clearly offers a lot of career tips for people. So I had kind of two sub questions to it. One is, just before you started your blog, how do you keep yourself updated with any industry information? I mean, there's quite a few different websites / destinations, but what do you typically do to keep yourself updated? And then, of course, the other question is that what advice could you give to our listeners who are interested probably in starting a career in journal publishing? I mean, we ourselves, my organization also works a lot with early career researchers and a lot of folks who are very excited about academic publishing. But what would you say to them?
In terms of how I keep up to date, I would say that I try to attend conferences in person if I can. Publishing conferences are great for those people starting out in the industry. People are so willing to talk and to chat and to convey their knowledge that they've gained over several years in the publishing industry. So it's always great to say, I'm here, I'm new to journal publishing, and I just want to learn, and even if you can't attend in person, since COVID, there are so many online options, and you can start up little chats with people in the online discussions. So I think there are lots of options to be able to connect and build a network, even if you're just starting out in journal publishing. And that's one of the main ways that I stay up to date. I also sign up to far too many newsletters. They pick up my inbox, but it's okay because it's helpful things. And I do try to stay up to date as much as possible. If you're in a company, you need to get a little bit outside that company, because often you just hear, what's going on in your company. And there's a big world out there of different publishers. So it's important to know a little bit about how other publishers function and how they do things a little bit differently. So my biggest tip for people in journal publishing and wanting to develop a career, I would say find your niche, because, when I first started in publishing, I started in kind of journal development. But even in journal development, you can find your niche. So I think my niche is sort of really open access, but also supporting societies as well and working with societies. And that's kind of become my niche and the thing that I enjoy. And it needs to be something you enjoy. I mean, if you're really interested in talking to people, maybe don't pick something that's really data driven and orientated, because that might not be for you when you're just starting out and you want to get out there and speak to people. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Find something that's really of interest and stick with it and become an expert in it. And you'll soon find people want to come to you and ask questions about what you know. I would say find your niche. That's my top tip.
Thank you so much, Robyn. This was so helpful and it was so insightful to have this chat with you. And I also know that, you're really busy. So I really appreciate the fact that, like I mentioned at some point of time in the conversation, that this can happen only if you're really passionate about the industry, about giving back, about, just helping others. And I know that you do that already through your blog, but I'm sure, through this episode as well, our listeners are really going to benefit.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's always, exciting and nice opportunity for me to talk about my blog as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Nikesh.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining us. We would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Feel free to write to us at insightexchange@cactusglobal.com or drop a comment on LinkedIn. Any feedback, questions, and perspectives are what makes this exchange of insights so valuable. So thank you, everyone.